So, thank you. My name is Mary. I believe everybody knows who I am. I'm one of the nutritionists here at God's Love. And Julia, our special events coordinator, and I would like to invite you to, thank you for coming to our final Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month event. There were several events this month, and I would like to take a moment to acknowledge, okay, just bear with me as I move through this. Our AAPI Heritage Month Planning Committee, Brandon, Charisma, Elaine, Emmett, Samoya, and our leaders, Alyssa and Kate, for putting together some great programming this month. Starting from an art discussion to some fantastic Malaysian food. So I just wanted to give a nod to our planning committee. Thank you, everyone. So let's start. Again, Julia and I we wanted to celebrate the rich diversity of Asian culture through culinary and nutrition education. Our panelists today, Andre DeKeegan, Austin Park, and Rina Panjwani have joined us graciously to share some information about their culture, potentially, and their experience in working in the fields. Each is an expert in the culinary and/or food and nutrition fields, and each will have a chance to share their perspectives, highlighting and perhaps broadening our understanding of Asian culture through their unique experiences. Our program today will flow through our panelist introductions, and each panelist has put together a bio so that we can learn about their work and their experiences, what they would like to share with us. And we'll move on to we have some interview questions that Julia will moderate. And hopefully that will draw out some really interesting information about, challenges that they faced as professionals in the field, personally perhaps, and also to shine a light on their work and contributions to the field of culinary and food nutrition in the Asian community. Of course, we'll leave some room for Q&A, and I should add that throughout the session, Natasha will be taking some screenshots, so she might even let us know when she's going to do that at one point, so we'll be smiling. Towards the end of our program, we wanted to acknowledge some of the recent anti-Asian hate crimes that have been going on, and to take a moment to pay tribute to the victims of the recent anti-Asian attacks. And Alyssa will be leading us through a moment of silence at that time. And then, of course, we will offer some DEIA resources that resonate, and all of this will be available, including the recording today. We'll make it available to everyone. So I would like to pass along the torch, so to speak, to our panelists themselves. And we can start with Andre, if you wouldn't mind. And Andre recently hit a milestone, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about that.
Small milestone. So I'm Chef Andre. I'm the senior sous chef here at God's Love We Deliver. And yesterday I actually celebrated my 20th anniversary here working at God's Love. So that was a big milestone for me personally. So I've been here for 20 years, but before that, I was born in the Philippines and I grew up in California. I came to California when I was a little kid, so I'm about as American as apple pie, meatloaf, and lumpia. Let's see, my mother is the one that taught me how to cook. I grew up in the Bay Area of California, so it was always surrounded by diverse cultures, an amazing array of different kinds of foods and different nationalities. I didn't really know kind of racism until I left that area, which I find, you know, I grew up in a very, very special place and during a very special time. As far as food was concerned, we came from a culture where we had a garden, and fresh produce and fresh fruit were part of my culture. And my mom would constantly tell me to run out and grab some spring onions or, grab some lemons off the tree, things like that. We always connected. We had a big Filipino community. Whenever we got together, of course, everybody was eating. We would often, for some of our parties, we would go to they'd throw all the kids in the back of a pickup truck and we'd drive to a farm where we would slaughter and butcher a goat or a pig, depending on how big the party was. I grew up fishing, throwing a net into the ocean and bringing out smelts. So that was kind of my upbringing. And I came to New York as an actor, but I found myself constantly working in restaurants. And through that, I graduated from the Culinary Institute of America, worked in a lot of places, but this is now my home, and I'm happy to kind of bring what I have to bring to the table here for our clients and for our organization. So that is my origin story.
Okay, I guess I will go next, if that's okay with you, Mary.
Go for it.
My name is Austin. I'm one of the dietitians here at God's Love. First of all, thank you for everyone to come here and listen to our thoughts on this panel. It's pretty awesome that we're doing this. I was born here in New York City. My parents are, I guess you'd say, first generation Asians, immigrants. And my parents were born in South Korea. So I identify as Korean American. And yeah, I was fortunate enough to be born in a very diverse area, I guess. Not to say that, I wouldn't have a completely different experience growing up, like maybe in a suburban area, but I really like New York City because I don't really, I haven't really felt, I guess you would say, microaggressions or like problems with racism against Asians because New York City is such a unique place, such a diverse place, and and just growing up, like I went to Bronx Science, and Bronx Science, if you don't know, there's plenty of Asians in Bronx Science. There's in Flushing where I grew up, it's a lot of different Asian communities like Chinatown, Koreatown. So in a way, it's kind of like New York City is kind of like a home away from home in a way for I would say for Asians. So it was a unique experience, fortunate experience for me growing up here. Um, I first went into engineering at Cornell for a few years. I looked at it as like a practical, stable job. I just wanted to get a good stable job engineering, and then I realized I really wanted to go in the direction where I felt really passionate about what I was doing. So that's why I got into nutrition. Um, and nutrition, I think it's interesting because obviously you don't see a lot of males in nutrition, let alone Asian American males. So I think it was a good experience for me to get my foot in the ground and finish my degree at Brooklyn College in dietetics. And then I went on to graduate school at NYU, and that's where I did my master's program and my dietetic internship. And yeah, that's where I connected to God's Love. And I interned here, I volunteered here. I think, it was a great experience. And yeah, now I'm here. But up to this point, I would say it's definitely a lot of detours. I feel like I have so much more, so much more like room to grow and to learn in this field and in all areas, not just nutrition itself, but just learning what it means to be Asian American in this field and everything like that. So yeah, just a really good, unique experience.
I guess I'll go next. My name is Rena Panjwani. Some of you guys might know me from when I worked at God's Love as a dietitian. I currently live in Tennessee. We moved here a few years ago, just better cost of living than New York, but it has come with some racism for sure that I did not experience living in New York. I grew up in Long Island. That's where I was born. My parents moved here from India. And growing up in Long Island, I feel like my school was fairly diverse. I never really felt other in any way. There were plenty of Indian kids, Asian kids. There was also a lot of white people, but generally speaking, I never really felt different in a racial sense. And I feel like kind of like Andre, like I ate, grew up eating Indian food, but also Italian, American, ate whatever was around me. And I've lived in Atlanta before. I went to undergrad at Emory. So that was also a fairly diverse place in college and also in Atlanta. And so it's really been living in Tennessee where I've sort of started to feel racism, but not in an overt way, but just kind of like in subtle ways. And there's times when like I see a pickup truck and I'm like, I don't know if I should go near that truck. Or I don't want to be seen by whoever might be driving the truck. It's just kind of like this subtle thing that unless you're living in it, you don't really, it's hard to articulate how it feels. But yeah, I was working at God's Love, and now I'm working at Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is obviously an insurance company. So I do counseling over the phone with people who use our insurance and their Medicare population. So it's also this kind of like older, very stuck in their ways Southern population that I'm working with. So it's interesting because I sound American over the phone and they're not seeing who I am. But then when I send them information in the mail, they're like, oh, it's kind of this click, like this person is not what she sounds like, like my accent is American. Anyway, so yeah, I love food. I got into nutrition through being vegan actually. And I, at the time when I was vegan, was exploring a lot of Indian cooking because it actually is fairly easy to eat a vegan diet with Indian food. And I, started feeling much healthier at the time and then ended up deciding to go the nutrition route for grad school. But yeah, that's kind of my story. And I guess we'll probably speak more to the racism in the panel questions.
Great. Thank you guys so much. And thank you, Mary, for putting this all together. So we have some questions. They're intentionally general because we kind of want to make it feel a little bit like a conversation. So one of the first questions we thought of when we were kind of putting this together was, what would you like this group, to understand about your culture and the way that food plays when connecting to your heritage, if at all? Because of course it might not at all. So I think we can just start with that.
All right. I guess I can go. I've always been under the philosophy that culture is edible. Everybody's, no matter where they're from, they say, our food is so fantastic. And that's one of the things that I enjoy about learning about new cultures, is because, it's an instant inroad into what a heritage is about. You sit down and you eat with a family, or you eat with a group, and you learn those kinds of things. Yeah, I think, let's see. We're not at the misconceptions part, right?
We can go into that. It's all very fluid if you want to move
okay.
that as well. That was just to let everyone know that the next question was about what misconceptions do you think Western culture spreads or portrays when it comes to AAPI cuisine. And again, it follows through. So,
okay. That one I find really interesting because, you know, it's often, I think the misconception is that Asia is kind of homogenous, you know, and oftentimes, you know, someone will look at Korean cuisine as the same as Japanese cuisine, as the same as Thai cuisine, or, you know, Chinese is all the same, you know, but it's such a diverse area. It would be like saying that all of European food is the same, all of African food is the same. And I think, you know, it reminds me of a class I was in at the CIA. I was in an Asian culinary class. And one of the things that we were doing at first was we were testing how fast we were using chopsticks. And we would have to take these dried beans and move them with chopsticks from one plate to another. I, being one of the only Asian people in the class, came in dead last, and people were shocked. And it's because I'm Filipino, right? Like, we don't use chopsticks, you know? And so it's just kind of that kind of misconception that you can bring to the table and your assumptions, you know? You know, the Philippines is one of those places, so many cultures kind of came in and colonized it, that we are often, you know, so much of our culture is Spanish and Catholic. We were run by the Spanish for 500 years. Yet that is kind of looked at through the lens of the South Pacific, you know, and we have a Muslim influence coming from the South, and then the Americans and the Japanese rolled in during certain parts, and all of these things kind of, you know, put their fingers into the Filipino pie and created what is now a modern Filipino cuisine, you know. And I think it's that kind of melting pot that's happened through the course of colonization and trade throughout the world. You know, no place is, you know, an island per se. It's going to get influenced by other things, and I think that's one of the great things about Filipino cuisine in general, and I can even say that, of course, for American cuisine. My 2 cents.
Yeah, I think Andre brought up, you know, a lot of good points. I'd say from like a Korean cuisine perspective, I'm actually pleasantly surprised to see Korean cuisine, especially in like big cities like New York City, shown to be like kind of like upscale dining, exquisite, high level, 5-star dining. That's really flattering. It's pretty amazing. Just one thing is that Korean, I'd say just the Korean culture and Korean cuisine in general, it really came from like humble roots. It came from, you know, the struggle. It came from the Korean War, and, you know, Korea being colonized by Japan in the past, and just a lot of different influences. I would say surrounding like war and even to a certain extent famine, and just Koreans just trying to gather what they can, just make the best of their situation, you know, in accordance to their climate and where they were living and stuff. So that's where a lot of these recipes came from, like out of survival. So it's just really cool. It's just really amazing to see how, just from the Korean War to today, you see like how kind of like how easily Korean culture has like mixed within Western culture, and probably like, you know, you have Korean fusion styles, and you see on Netflix, you see all these TV shows like covering, you know, Korean cuisine, and, you know, I think the way it's been covered has been respectable, and, you know, people have, in my opinion, have respected Korean cuisine and Korean culture. Yeah, but I guess a misconception is that it wasn't always, I guess, this well accepted. I'd say like when I was younger, in high school or in middle school, I didn't even see Korean cuisine being nearly as popular as it is now. So yeah, I think it's a it's pretty incredible actually. So I'll just leave it there.
Rena, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, a lot of the same kind of themes are with Indian cuisine as well, with the British, colonizing India. They're like chicken tikka masala, for example, is actually like a British version of a chicken curry. They're like basically they made it up because of the palates of the kings and the royals that were colonizing India. So, and another thing I feel like is important is just that food, for at least I'm sure this is in most cultures, but like food is part of every single thing in Indian culture, obviously celebration, but even for like religious ceremonies, you offer food to the gods. And then like in wedding ceremonies, everybody eats together to like give their blessing for the bride and groom. So it's just food is literally part of every single thing that we do. Like at my wedding, we had to have chai served at our wedding and during the ceremony so that like guests could get up in the middle of the ceremony and go get a cup of chai, which like my husband was like, that's so rude. I can't believe we would just let people do that during our wedding, which is supposed to be this like very important experience. But obviously, people were quiet and polite, but it was still very weird for him to have that be part of our ceremony. And then just, I think kind of like how Andre mentioned that all Asian food is very different, obviously Japanese, Korean, etc. In India, the food in different regions is extremely different. Like North Indian is very different from South Indian food. In South India, it's common for people to eat with their hands, to eat on leaves. In the North, where it was more British influence, there's, eating with your hands to an extent, but a lot of like forks and knives and spoons and stuff, and out of bowls and on plates. So just those little things that we don't really think about regionally within the country are very different. So I just wanted to highlight that too.
That's really interesting. I always found sort of the history of we spoke about this a little like a couple of weeks ago, but the colonization of food and how when you go to certain countries, like the food is actually influenced by like multi-cultures depending on the history of that country. Another question we have is, what herbs, spices, food are you inspired by from your background? Or what would you recommend to people that we might not know about?
I guess I'll go first. It's funny because the ingredient I'm going to talk about, I think the first time I met Austin was at a fancy food show. And I talked to him about fish sauce and how it is like one of my favorite kind of flavor profiles through Southeast Asia. And I don't know if everybody is familiar with fish sauce. In Vietnam, it's called nam pla. In the Philippines, it's called patis, and it's used in a lot of Pacific Island and Southeast Asian cuisine. And essentially what it is you have either shrimp or anchovy, some kind of oily fish or shellfish, and it's put into a barrel with salt and water, and then all of that is extracted. And the sauce that comes out of there is like crazy salty, crazy funky, huge amounts of the like umami flavor. It's used consistently as in dipping sauces and marinades. One of my favorite things that my mom would make was almost like it was like a Filipino salsa with tomatoes and scallion and fish sauce and some kind of hot pepper. And she would make that and we would toss it on everything. But it's one of those things, it's one of those flavor profiles that you can find all throughout kind of like the warmer regions of the South Pacific. And that's a really, really cool ingredient. That was the first thing that I thought of. Before I give up the mic, I want to tell you guys that I love Indian and Korean food. I think, like, Austin, what you were saying about Korean food being like a new kind of elevated Asian food is right on the money. I think it's that is so tracking right now. And as far as Indian cuisine, I've always said that if there's one spot on earth, even though it's a gigantic spot, if anybody understands inherently spices, it's the Indian culture. It all comes back to them and their understanding of blending of spices and how the trade routes for spices just came from there and spread all across the world. I would love to go to India and like learn from the motherland. So I just wanted to get that out there. Thank you.
I guess
Yeah.
I'll go to, oh, sorry, Austin, do you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, Indian food in India is a different level for sure. And as far as misconceptions, I didn't get to touch on that so much, but I feel like there is this misconception that everything, at least growing up, it's probably better now because Indian food is also similar to Korean, where it's becoming, kind of higher end, and there's higher end Indian restaurants. So people may be becoming more familiar with some of the different dishes, but that there's just this concept that everything is curry or everything is spiced with curry or everything is spicy. And that is like grossly inaccurate. I mean, there's obviously curry dishes where there's a gravy and a sauce that has meat and vegetables or tofu, whatever it is that you might eat, that would be considered like a curry. But there's lentils, dals that come in all different varieties, sabzis, which are kind of like the vegetable dishes, and then breads, rice. Like there's just so much to it, more than just that like standard kind of Indian curry that people think of. But as far as spices, one that I feel like I tend to use a lot is kasuri methi, which is fenugreek leaves, dried fenugreek leaves. And I think my mom used it a lot growing up. So like now it's just something that I tend to put in almost everything that I make, but it just kind of adds this like elevated flavor towards the end of a dish. And they're dry leaves. There's also the seeds that you can use and grind up and use as a spice, like while you're cooking, but I like to use the leaves at the end. I feel like that kind of gives you that like restaurant taste that some people are looking for with their home cooking with Indian food. So that's one that I use a lot. And another one I think that's interesting is called hing. It's Hing. I think the English word for it is like asafoetida, which it's like the A and the E are connected. I don't know, you could probably Google it, but if you Google hing, Hing, that's what would come up. But it's basically a spice that's used in a lot of foods that would be considered to cause gas, like cauliflower dishes, lentil dishes. And it doesn't have a really strong flavor, but it does actually help to prevent that gas that you might experience after eating something like that. So there's, like Andre said, there's those reasons, the knowledge of spice, and also, there's roots in Ayurvedic practices of using certain spices for specific, physical experiences you might have from eating certain foods. So that's another one. And Daniel just said it's similar to, what did you say?
Fennel. He said it was.
Yeah.
And can I just add one thing? So we've started using fenugreek in a couple of our dishes. I know that we do and kind of a Persian-inspired minced beef with black-eyed peas that we finish with fenugreek, and I love fenugreek. So that's an awesome, awesome thing to add toward the end.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, Andre, I was actually going to ask if there's, when we look at our meals at God's Love, what influences you guys use. And I know Daniel's on the call as well, so he might want to pipe in. Like where are we looking to for new tastes, new food?
It's funny that you mentioned that. I just did my yearly evaluation. I think when I'm developing recipes for the menu, and I know Daniel can kind of attest to this attitude, we look for kind of diversity in culinary techniques, and kind of like a broad stroke, trying to touch base on different things. And, as long as they're bold flavors that fit into the nutritional profile that we need, that's kind of what we're searching for. I mean, we've just started, they're also very ingredient based. So we've started these relationships with single origin spice purveyors, and so we're getting killer cumin and killer smoked paprika and turmeric and just like really, really high end ingredients. And it makes all the difference in the world, not to mention our wild caught fish and our grass fed beef now. I mean, all of these things, we kind of look at these ingredients and say, how do we highlight this ingredient in a way that we can serve 5,000 people, and make it preparable and nutritious and delicious and all that kind of thing. So that's kind of my attitude.
Amazing. Thank you. And I'm just checking on the time. And so I think we can probably go into any questions that anyone else on the call has. I think you can either ask in the chat section or raise your Zoom hand and we can and unmute yourself. Let's see. Does anyone have any questions?
I wanted to hear what Austin had to say for the ingredient for his for Korea that he likes to use. I wanted to hear his thoughts.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'll just get right into it. So I went to I went to Korea once in my life, and the first thing that happened when I went there was I went to my aunt's house, and she gave me she pulled something out of the freezer, and it's something called skate. So what it is, it's like it's a really, if I had to describe it, it's like a really extreme type of sauerkraut. It's like a really strong. It tastes like probably what ammonia would taste like, to be honest. So that's, and she like I tried it, of course. Why wouldn't you try it, right? So I tried it, and I think that kind of like gives like a whole new side to what people may not know about Korean food. It's like so much of Korean food is really fermented, maybe for like really long periods of time. And if you do it the right way, you do it safely, it can be very healthy. There's a lot of probiotics in there. Some Koreans just take it to like a whole new level. It's like the Olympics of fermenting food. Like it's like a contest to see like who can eat the strongest fermented food. I think that's really what it is. It's so basically when I ate skate, it was such a strong taste. Like I couldn't relate to enjoying this at all. I mean, because I think that's like a whole new. Well, I don't think Western culture is ready for that side of Korean cuisine yet. That's not going to make it to the 5-star restaurants yet. But that's like a whole new like side of Korean cuisine. It's like probiotics, fermentation. So yeah, in a sense, I think a lot of Korean food is good for your gut. And one more thing is ginseng. So we use a lot of ginseng, a lot of our soups. Ginseng has been shown in studies to have like strong immune system properties, even like brain, health benefits for your brain. So, I even did a recipe like on chicken. It's called samgyetang, where we use ginseng. Like during the summer, we actually there's this concept where we fight heat with heat. So during the hottest time yeah, exactly, Natasha. It's in our blog, and it's glwd.org, by the way, if you don't know. So in the nutrition section, but during the hottest time in the summer, like I don't know why we torture ourselves, but we eat like the hottest soup imaginable. It's called samgyetang. So it has good immune system properties. You know, it's good source of collagen, good source of protein, and yeah, I think yeah. Thanks, Natasha. So you can check it out. It's also a good representation of another side of Korean cuisine that the Western culture may not have been introduced to yet, because Western culture is really into like Korean barbecue and stuff, and that's amazing. But you know, just those two sides, like the fermentation side, and then like the health benefiting soups, things like that.
I apologize, Austin. I skipped that question for you. So thank you so
No
much.
worries, no worries. It was gonna come out either sooner or later.
Brandon has a question. If we're ready to move on to Q&A. Brandon offers a question. What is a go-to dish your parents would prepare for you while you were growing up? And anyone can jump in.
I'll go. For me, it was rice and dal just being like a lentil soup. I think it was just very easy for my mom, and she was a single mom working a lot. So that was something that she could either make like in the morning before she left for work, and we would have it for dinner when she came home, or was easy for her to throw together at the end of a long day. So that's kind of like my comfort food now is rice and dal, just those two things. And sometimes I'll add like yogurt or something to it just to give it a little more protein. But that was our go-to growing up.
Just my growing up, just my favorite dish would just, you know, be Korean barbecue. Actually, what many people on this panel might have tried already. Just simple homemade style Korean barbecue, nothing too fancy. Just rice, Korean barbecue, and maybe like kimchi on the side.
I think my favorite dish growing up, you may have heard of it. It's a Filipino dish called adobo. It is a kind of braise, and it could be used with chicken or pork. And it's essentially a really garlicky soy and vinegar based braise with a ton of black pepper and bay leaf. Kind of sour, very salty, hits the spot over a big bowl of white rice. It's the first thing I taught my daughter how to make, and she made it for her grandmother, and that went very successfully.
Do we have any other questions?
I have a question. What is, and Rena, feel free to adapt this question, is your favorite restaurant in New York City? And what do you love to order when you're there? And that can be of any culture or cuisine.
Okay. I live in Queens, and I don't know if it's really my favorite, but just growing up, I guess it's what my relatives and my family had the most. It's a place called there are a couple of places, but one of them is called Samongak, and it's basically a Korean Chinese fusion cuisine. So basically, we pretty much order the same thing every time. It's sweet and sour chicken or pork, black bean noodles, and what's the other one? Oh, and garlic spicy shrimp. So honestly, I don't know if any of those things really have strong Korean roots, but that's what we really enjoyed growing up. So I would say that's kind of like just reminds me of my childhood the most.
I've been going to this restaurant in Chinatown for probably about 30 years now. It's called Great New York Noodle Town, and it's cheap. It's questionably clean, but they've got killer noodles, and they've got killer like roast meats. You can go there and spend, $8 and be completely full. They have gigantic tables that you can sit at with 6 people. They're open until 3:30 in the morning, and then they reopen again, I think, at about 10:30 in the morning. And so you can go there at any time of day, and they'll be either full of lawyers or after work club. I mean, after club kids. It's just a great kind of New York Chinese food institution. And like Austin, has nothing to do with Filipino food, but I just adore that place.
When I lived in New York, I was able to go to Indian Accent, which is like a higher end Indian restaurant. I think it's relatively new. Well, I guess it's been a while since I lived there, but that was really good, and it's higher end, so it was fancy. But it wasn't like authentic Indian food. It was definitely the more colonized version of it, but it was very good. From a 3 a.m. place that I used to go to a lot was Mamoon's for falafel. I love that place.
Let's just eke out one more question. I see Ronnie has her hand up. In the interest of time, we want to have a moment of silence after this. So let's take your question, Ronnie.
Okay, so it's not a question, actually just a comment, but so as you may know from my last name, I have Italian influence in my background. And so, I guess our go-to dish as young people, as children, and, kind of remains today is pasta with tomato sauce. But a few years ago, and that's not all I eat, by the way, I do really enjoy different cuisines, but I never really experimented with Indian cuisine. And a few years ago, I took a class at NYU. It was a dysphagia class. And so the test client that I worked with was a client who had actual dysphagia. He had difficulty swallowing, and he needed a pureed diet, and he was Indian. And so my team went about preparing. The whole thing was kind of a version of Chopped, where we competed to see who where the best foods came from. We actually worked in the test kitchen at NYU, and we made some very tasty Indian dishes. But it really opened me up to different Indian spices and just different Indian dishes. One was I'm not sure if I'm going to remember the name, but it was a spicy tomato soup. And we made mango lassis, which I know, Rena, you did once at God's Love, and it was just a really terrific experience, and again really opened me up to that particular cuisine. And then shout out to Austin, but when we were before COVID, let's put it that way, we often enjoyed going across the street to the Woo.
It was
Thanks
good. Yes.
Thanks for sharing that, Ronnie. Brandon, I see that you have a question. In the interest of time, we wanted to move on to the moment of silence. Maybe we could find another way of answering this question. If somebody has any ideas about that. The question was, if perhaps you wanted to do this via email or another way, what advice would you give your 12-year-old self regarding navigating the world as an Asian American? I think that's a fantastic question. But let's hold that. And unless you want to answer pretty quickly in a couple of words.
Yeah, I would say just be confident in your culture, be proud of it, even because, as long as you show confidence in your culture, other people will see that and gravitate towards it. And that has happened, as you can see.
Totally agree with that, Austin. Totally agree with that. Also, empower others, find allies.
Okay. I'd like to hand this over to Alyssa. to lead our moment of silence.
Thanks so much, Mary. And thanks to Mary and Julia for organizing this event today, and our incredible panelists for sharing your experiences and perspectives. And I think we're all extremely hungry at this point. I know I learned a bunch today, and I have so much to go look up in the way of spices. And I just wanted to say that while today's event is focused on the celebration of Asian American and Pacific Islander heritage, the organizing committee felt it was very important to acknowledge the recent increase in anti-Asian hate incidents, as well as the historical racism that Asian American and Pacific Islanders have faced in our country and around the world, and the trauma that that has produced. And so what we'd like to do right now is to take a moment of silence to show our solidarity with AAPI communities. So I'm going to invite you to take a moment of silence, and when we're done, I'll speak again. All right. I invite everybody to come back in to our collective space together, and I'm going to hand it back over to Mary to finish us out. Mary, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I wanted to just pull up quickly our resource page. And is it showing?
Now it is.
It's showing, yes. This is our resource page offered by Marla earlier in the month, and we will make this PowerPoint available and the recording available to everyone. I just want to say I am completely blown away by the sharing of individual cuisines by our panelists and what you guys offered to us. Thank you so much for joining us. You shared individual stories, you've blended together, you've offered magic to us, and it is just totally appreciated. Thank you so much. You've also offered us historical backgrounds information, and it's totally appreciated. Thank you for your time and for speaking with us today.
And before everyone goes, can we do a picture?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so everyone smile. Okay, got it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
for
you guys
coming.
so much.
Thank you all.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you,
me.
everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Mary.
Rena.
That was great. Congrats all. Thanks.
Thanks so much for setting this up.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.